I have this on recording now. I'm just gonna leave it on recording for the whole time. Just,
I'll try not to make any funny noises.
Just a moment. Oh dear. Do you have the questions on your phone that we can give him?
Is it on Canvas?
It's on
It's
Google
on
Docs.
Google Docs.
Oh, yeah, I think I can get that.
Nope. How long do you have, just so I have a time frame?
I don't have any precise time when I have to leave.
It's called documentary sources, I
Since
think.
I'm on my bike,
You should just be able to
it's
search
getting
for it
colder.
from the main page.
Like I guess
Yeah.
before it's too
You know, I understand that.
I think I saw it just a second ago.
If either of you all can record, I definitely have it on mine. Or I can, yeah, here.
I definitely saw it. He had it. It was there. I saw it.
I have it up right now.
There it is.
Or that.
You should record on your phone. iPhones have the best mic quality.
Okay.
Am I
Right.
using that one?
Yeah, we can
No,
do
we
it.
can't figure it out.
Okay.
Um,
I don't think I've ever used one of these.
we might have to call an audible on some of these because some of these are pretty specific
Yeah,
to
I'll
that one
amend.
era of history.
Yes. Okay. So you say that you teach European history here?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you know much about American history in that time frame?
Well, I lived through it.
Well,
I
that's fair.
was born in 1948. I was a young teenager during the civil rights movement period in the early 1960s, and very sympathetic to the movement, but I could not call myself a participant in it.
Where did you live during that time?
In the early 1960s, my family lived in Southern California.
What was the mood surrounding the movement in Southern California?
To be honest, I couldn't really tell you. I never participated in a demonstration, and I don't remember the topic even came up very much in our school. But my parents were liberals and were supportive of the civil rights movement. We watched the news on TV. I knew that they strongly favored rights for black people. It did seem to be something that was happening in the South and not where we were in California.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear mention of Jewish people in regard to the civil rights movement?
Yes, my family is Jewish. We knew that young Jews were going to the South to participate in civil rights organizing activities. We certainly knew that of the three civil rights workers who were killed in Mississippi in 1964, two of them were Jewish.
What do you feel about the Jewish culture or religion may have led Jewish people to go south to participate in that movement?
Jews in America are a minority group. We have always known that our rights are tied to those of other minorities. Many of the racist groups that opposed rights for blacks were also very hostile to Jews, like the Ku Klux Klan. So there was a strong feeling that this was a cause that we shared with black people.
How do you feel like Northern Jews and Southern Jews compared during that time?
I would have to say that at that time I didn't know any Southern Jews, but I know from reading about the subject that Jews had lived in the South for a long time. Jews had settled throughout the South during the 19th century, including here in Lexington. In general, Southern Jews got along with their white neighbors by not raising a lot of issues. They did not want to be identified as publicly usually as supporters of the civil rights movement. And there were tensions between Jews who came from the north and came down thinking that they were going to help this great crusade, and local Jews who often said, "You're going to get us in trouble, and we don't want to have you here. We wish you would go back home," so to speak. Here in Lexington, I do know, although I only came here years later, that one of the two local rabbis, William Leffler from Temple Adith Israel, was very active in the civil rights movement. I've seen pictures of him marching demonstrations here, but not all of his congregation were happy about his being so prominent.
So was there a feeling among Southern Jewish people that it might be better for Jewish people on the whole in America if the Northern Jews weren't so active in the civil rights movement?
Yes, definitely. There was a feeling that if Jews became identified with Martin Luther King and the protesters, that Southern Jews would pay for this.
So what was the feeling like for Northern Jewish people in contrast to Southern Jewish people that led them to feel more inclined to participate?
Well, in the northern states, of course, segregation laws had never existed. There was a strong feeling that racial prejudice is a violation of basic American values, that it can't be permitted, not in the North and not in the South. Having said that, we have to say that, like other northern whites, northern Jews were often rather blind to race problems in their own part of the country when major riots broke out in northern cities like Detroit and Newark in the middle 1960s. That shocked Jews just as it shocked other whites who thought this was a southern problem. It didn't really affect us.
So do you feel that Jewish people in that time were viewed by the civil rights community first as Jewish people or first as white people, or what was the balance?
You're asking me what blacks thought of it?
Well, not so much what blacks thought, but what the, in studying this, a lot of what we found was that when the Black Power movement rose, it led to a feeling that Jewish people were more of part of the white crowd, and that solidarity that they felt that may have led to participation wasn't as prevalent, or wasn't as mutually recognized.
Yes, as the 1960s went on, it began to be clear that in some places there were conflicts between blacks and Jews, and the school system in New York City was one of the flashpoints during this period. You had a lot of white Jewish teachers, and you had black militants insisting that there should be more black control of the schools, that there should be more black teachers. By the late 1960s, in 1968 and 69, you had very visible conflicts emerging. And some black activists did develop and still hold today strongly anti-Jewish opinions. So that sense that blacks and Jews are always on the same side in American life would not apply today the way it did in the early 1960s.
Do you feel that that may have had an impact on the fact that Jewish people aren't necessarily associated with the civil rights movement?
Well, if you look at the histories of the civil rights movement, the participation of Jews is always mentioned. Proportionally, Jewish students, for example, were much more likely than other whites to volunteer for things like the freedom rides here in the South, and some of them, as we've already mentioned, even died as a result. But from the point of view of black participants in the movement, it's overwhelmingly their story and their struggle, and at the time they appreciated the help the Jewish activists gave them. But this was a black movement led by people like Martin Luther King. They were the main players, and we need to remember that.
So, when looking back at something like that
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging that it was a black movement,
Mm-hmm.
where do you think the place is with acknowledging a group like Jewish people where it wasn't their movement but they did have a part in it?
Well, the civil rights movement took tremendous courage from the blacks who participated in it, but its success depended on the white community, enough of the white community recognizing that this was a just cause. And I think American Jews can be proud that so many of them saw that and supported it as activists or as financial supporters. But, there were many white Christians for whom this was also an important cause, who made important contributions to it. There was a lot of controversy about the movie Selma that came out about a year ago. One of the things that was controversial was the way President Lyndon Johnson was portrayed in the movie. Johnson played a very large role in making sure that civil rights laws were passed. He did so even though he knew it was going to make him very unpopular with a lot of Southern whites. So we need to recognize the contributions of lots of people across the spectrum in the United States to our present understanding of civil rights.
Where did Jewish people fall in the culture of white people at the time with relation to the civil rights movement?
In a rather, I would say, a rather ambivalent position. Jews were increasingly accepted in American life after World War II and have been increasingly successful in American society, but anti-Semitism still existed. It still exists today. Unfortunately, we've seen an upsurge of it this year. Jews are never completely sure and secure of their place in American life. That was one reason why Jews felt the struggle for civil rights for everybody was a Jewish struggle as well as a black struggle for most Jews.
Was there a feeling of frustration from Northern Jews when they went to the South and did not necessarily have Southern Jews share in that sense?
I couldn't say in detail. I would imagine there must have been some very awkward moments on both sides. You had very idealistic young people saying these are the values of the Jewish tradition, the values that come out of the Bible and the things we believe, and you had Southern Jews saying, we live here, you don't make conditions impossible for us, you don't know what it's like down here.
What values from the specifically religious perspective of Judaism may have led to their participation?
Well, the Jewish scriptures teach us to strive for justice. They tell us to defend the weak and the oppressed. Every year we celebrate the main Jewish holiday, the holiday of Passover, which is a holiday about the freeing of the Jewish slaves in ancient Egypt. And that's a very powerful message that all people deserve to be free. And that story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt has resonated with Jews for 3,000 years. It resonates very powerfully with African Americans. It's frequently a very important story for them, too.
What kind of social pressures in the South kept the Southern... Was it social pressures in the South that kept the Southern Jews from participating the way Northern Jews did?
Oh, absolutely. They had to live with their neighbors in the Southern communities. In the North, you had big cities where you had very large Jewish populations in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. In the South, Jews tended to be a small minority, and they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to stand out.
Do you feel that they had similar cultural and religious influences as Northern Jews, but they just didn't have the platform that Northern Jews did? to follow through with it?
As I've been saying, they lived in different circumstances. They valued some things about their lives in the South, and most of them didn't want to really stand out. There were exceptions. There was, for example, a man whose biography I've read, a professor named George Iggers, who had been a Jew who was persecuted in Germany under Hitler, and he had come and moved to New Orleans, and he and his wife were teaching there. And when the civil rights movement started, they felt we have to be involved. You know, it's the same issue as when Jews were persecuted under Hitler. But the majority of Southern Jews, I think, may have sympathized quietly with the civil rights movement, but were not going to involve themselves in it publicly.
So how much of a role did that historical persecution of Jewish people play in their decision to participate?
Oh, it was a large one. The realization that Jews had often been a minority that had been discriminated against and even in some cases killed makes most Jews sympathetic to other groups that seem to be in a similar situation.
Yeah, I lost the list, sorry.
I have a question. So, part of our research is about the role of Jewish women, specifically, and so I want to know how aware of you were at the time, or maybe now, of Jewish women-specific groups and their involvement in the civil rights movement.
I couldn't say how aware I was at the time. You've got to remember that in the 1960s, all the things that we talk about in connection with women's rights and the women's movement had not taken place yet. It was considered absolutely normal and natural that the civil rights movement, the public leaders of it were mostly men, Martin Luther King and people like that, and among the Jewish activists who went to the South, the ones who got the most publicity were men also. Now there were women who went. There's a woman named Viola Luzzatto, a Jewish volunteer who was killed in Mississippi, and we remember her along with the two male Jewish students who were killed that year. But they got less publicity than the men who got involved. I wish I could tell you about the role of Jewish women's organizations, but I wasn't aware of it. And, it's not something I've studied particularly.
Do you feel that there was any notable difference between men and women when thinking about going south for the civil rights movement?
There's no question, I think, that when it was an issue of recruiting people to go and risk being beaten up and arrested in the South, there was a feeling that that's for the boys, and the women should not be exposed to this kind of thing. But some of them did go, and as I say, one even got killed.
Did that feeling that was more of a thing for boys, make it harder for women to choose to go south?
I would imagine it did. I couldn't say. I've never been in a position to ask people. But I would imagine, among other things, that their families would have been much more opposed to letting a teenage girl do this than a teenage boy.
Did it result in particularly different jobs between the men and women who participated?
Yeah, you look at the pictures, the men are always the ones in front of the microphones and the ones writing statements and manifestos and so on, and the women were usually in sort of supporting roles, making sandwiches and doing the things that needed to be done behind the scenes.
So do you feel that behind the scenes nature of their work may contribute to why they're not always as recognized?
Oh, yeah, unquestionably, sure.
beyond just the fact that it was behind the scenes work, are there any inherently gender-related reasons that they may not be as recognized when viewing the civil rights movement?
Historians, too, have taken a long time to learn to recognize where women have played an important role in movements. There's no question that women were involved in the civil rights movement, black women and also white women supporters. But as I say, at the time, it was primarily the men who were on the posters and up front. Not always, of course. Rosa Parks, for example, was a key figure in the civil rights movement. But she was usually understood as this kind of ordinary woman who just decided one day she wasn't going to go sit in the back of the bus. Actually, she was a longtime activist who had been involved in civil rights efforts for 10 years before that. And she knew very well what she was doing, among other things, that a woman being arrested would get more publicity than a man.
Were there any particular roles in the civil rights movement that Jewish people played disproportionately when compared to their counterparts?
Well, as I said, I think in terms of the proportion of Jews who were actively involved in the civil rights movement, it's higher than any other group in the white community.
Mm-hmm. Were there any jobs that they tended to do more often that you're aware of?
I couldn't say specifically. They were active in a variety of supporting roles in the civil rights movement.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions that you know we want to hit?
Yeah, so one of the things we also found in our research is that the women, white women and Jewish women, tended to be able to cooperate and collaborate with black Southern women more easily than the men who were in charge of groups. So one is, why do you think that is? And maybe also, how do you think that affected the movement?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I don't know much about the facts. There is a kind of stereotype that women are better at networking and collaborating and cooperating and less likely to fight among each other about who gets recognized as being in charge. And maybe that was borne out in some encounters. But I'm just not a good resource person for that.
Do you feel that Jewish people understood going into the civil rights movement that they were going to be playing a entirely supporting role, and that they weren't necessarily like trying to lead things, but they were trying to provide a platform?
I think that was absolutely clear. Jews came to the civil rights movement to support the cause of African Americans, not to pretend that this was a movement about them and their rights.
So was there much negative feeling when they were steadily being removed from the civil rights movement in the later 60s?
Well, yeah, there was concern in the Jewish community as the African American movement seemed to be becoming more exclusively black. The ideal that I think most Jews who participated in the civil rights movement thought they were supporting was an integrated society, one where everybody would be, everybody would participate equally. They were not contributing in their minds to a society in which blacks would become increasingly separated from the rest of American society.
So in that time, did Jewish people continue to contribute to the civil rights movement, and just not in any position of, not in any higher up position? Did they still work a ground game at all? Or?
It depends on what you mean by the civil rights movement. American Jews have continued to support equality and the ideals of integration overwhelmingly. The question in the minds of some Jews has been, is that really what African Americans are still aiming for.
Do you feel the solidarity that Jews seem to feel with African American people in that time? Do you feel that that was somewhat one-sided, or do you feel like that went both ways?
I don't quite understand.
The persecution that Jews historically have felt, and the sense of and the anti-Semitism that they felt, and what they were able to take of the culture that developed from that,
Yeah.
and how they may have been able to relate that to the African American struggle. Do you feel like that was something that was recognized between Jews and African Americans to Jews, or do you feel like that mostly was just something recognized
Well,
by Jewish people?
I think, in the early 1960s, certainly the leaders of the civil rights movement were very glad to have the support of Jewish activists. Later, as you get this kind of turning toward black nationalism on the part of some, not all, of the people involved, then you start to see this greater separation. Jews coming to feel that they weren't wanted among blacks, and blacks coming to feel that Jews were not part of that they did not really understand what the issues facing blacks were.
Did the rise of the Nation of Islam inspire strife between the groups?
It's one of the signs of this growth of a more nationalist and exclusivist black attitude. The Nation of Islam is very hostile to Jews, and it has been a consistent problem for American Jews to deal with this current of anti-Jewish feeling in the black community. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Do you know if it's okay if we stay in here to work for just a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
okay. Let me see if the secretary is still here.
Karen, I've been being interviewed by a couple of students over in 1745, and I'm going to leave now because they're done with me, but they want to know if they can stay for a few more minutes. Okay. Yeah, it's just important that somebody locks the room after you leave, so
Yeah.
Okay.
if you could let Dr.
Just let me know when you're
close
leaving.
the hall.
Okay, thank you.
It's great. So are
Thank
they
you.
your students or
No, they're from Word, but I talked to them.
Excellent. Good for you. Yeah, you can stay.
Okay, thank you so much.
How you doing?
So, I think that was pretty helpful.
I think it was really good, yeah. There's a lot of stuff he said that will be useful.
Yeah, I am a bit worried about getting our rough draft in tonight.
I'm a little bit worried about it, yeah.
Um,
it just depends on how rough he honestly cares if it is,
I
'Cause-
don't. I think it can be pretty rough.
I mean,
Okay.
in general, honestly, every rough draft I've turned in has been, pretty damn rough. And then the final's been
Yeah.
pretty good.
Okay.
I always get hundreds on the rough draft.
Are you
If you had to do a voiceover night, would you be able to do that? Or
I'm not sure if I could do a voiceover.
what if my voice is literally terrible right now because I'm so sick? What if one of us sent you a voiceover? Could you put it in? Because you said you were wanting to edit, right?
Yeah.
If you had a voiceover, could you put it into the video?
It might not fit up, but yeah. Also, your phone rang,
Yeah, I saw that
and I
happening.
switched out, so mine has. Oh, I ran out of storage too. We had to switch out phones twice.
No.
Mine ran out of storage, so I don't know if I have everything. I'm not sure if he has everything. He definitely only has the first half.
Yeah, I only
Then
have
I
the
have-
first 12 minutes.
I have the next 8 minutes.
Okay.
That's almost all of it.
Yeah, it'll be fine. And this, probably. This sounded fine when we were doing it.
Yeah.
Is this still running?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we'll leave it running. I want to check this out because sometimes he did talk a little quiet and there was a bunch of background noise. I'm hoping it's good on there.
Yeah, I would suspect it would be, but I also feel like the majority of the things that are going to be included, we probably got
Yeah.
between the two phones.
I'm gonna go ahead and put this on Google, my voice recording on Google Drive. So and share it.
Did you record it already?
What? No, the last 8 minutes of.
Oh, that's what you mean. Okay, I thought you meant
The voiceover.
I thought you did a voiceover.
No, we haven't even
Yeah.
written it yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's why I was confused.
So, in terms of the stakeholder analysis, which one did you do?
Jewish folk.
Okay, did anyone do women?
I don't know. Somebody
if
did.
if somebody did women,
Because
it
we got
was
the most general groups.
it was
I feel
either
like-
Preston or
Because I feel like that's the weak point of
Agreed.
our content right now. So if somebody did that stakeholder,
Yeah.
and we could use their sources,
Yeah.
then we could fill in the gaps.
Yeah, agreed. I'm gonna look on the group me and see if we did one because I know like we did the most general group, so somebody must have.
So does this have like an SD card?
No, it's actually onboard memory, so
Oh, okay.
we can get it off. I'm not. Usually there's a screw on the bottom. I can't read it.
Preston did women.
Okay, so we should ask him.
Yeah.
We should ask him to share his stakeholder analysis with us.
Yeah. I mean, why don't we just all add it to Canvas like we did for the rough drafts? And
Oh,
then
yeah.
we could all have the resources as needed.
Because tonight I will have time to dump in people's stuff and kind of edit it into a voiceover. Oh no, where's the cable? Oh, there it is. Oh gosh.
It was nice. He knew a lot more than I thought he was going to.
Oh, way more.
Just from like what he said.
I think a lot of these academics have imposter syndrome. I swear, like every single one has been like that.
Yeah. He started talking about some stuff, and I was like, okay, yes, this is very specific. Thank you for doing this.
So has it popped up?